One of the best things that we got within the Kome update was the changes to Nova's kit. Now, these changes are a huge buff, but not with some nerfs. What's good, folks? It's KnightmareFrame here with a new Warframe video coming at you with the new Nova. For you to understand what changed, let's go over how she used to work and compare side by side with the new kits. Starting off with her passive, it was bad. The passive required you to be skill issued for it to actually work. So you needed to be knocked down just so you can knock down enemies close to you. So if you had Overguard or Prime Surefooted, this passive was non-existent. The new passive is a lot better. Killing enemies while they're slowed has a chance to drop energy orbs, and while they're sped up, they drop health orbs. Her first ability used to primarily scale with duration to give you the initial damage reduction, which only affected your health and particle count. Also, they only scaled with strength when it dealt damage, and the damage it used to deal was slash. The particles scaled with range, so they would auto-seek any enemy within range. So when building for the damage reduction, you wanted narrow-minded to reduce your range so you don't lose your particles. Now, the particle count is the only thing that is affected by duration. The damage reduction scales per particle with strength. So, strength gives one particle an initial damage reduction value, which then scales with additional particles to a maximum of 90%. This damage reduction now affects both your health and shields. And now the damage the particles deal is blast, with some status effect application, which then synergizes with her fourth for even more explosions. The best part about the first ability now is that it's recastable, so you don't have to use an augment or wait for the particles to deplete. However, recasting does have a 2.5 second internal cooldown. Here's a nifty thing, the particles are coded as weapons, so they're affected by conditional base damage increases like Vigorous Swamp and Arcane Arachne, as they scale multiplicatively with strength increases, and even elemental buffs like Nourish. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with elemental infusion buffs that use an augment, for example, Shock Trooper, Venom Dose, Freeze Force, etc. The second ability got a slight change, but for the better. Before the change, when you cast the ball, it was a small, slow-moving projectile that tracked your camera's movement in a super slow motion, which also absorbed damage that you dealt to it, so then you can navigate it towards enemies to explode the ball and deal radiation damage within 15 meters. It also used to be affected by Vigorous Swamp and Arcane Arachne to increase its damage output, but that is no longer the case. With the change, the ball is slightly bigger, easier to control, and snaps to where your camera moves. Same mechanic to absorb damage, but now has a visual indicator to show if it absorbed maximum damage. It takes 5 shots, excluding multi-shot, to max it out. Crits and status effects are not taken into account with the damage absorption, so you want raw damage, multi-shot, and elemental damage. So try to find weapons that are fast, deals a lot of initial damage with a lot of multi-shot and fast reload speed. So great options for antimatter drop weapon buffer are Felarx and the Tigrex Prime, but use whatever you feel comfortable with. However, the biggest change is that you can recast the ability at no energy cost to send it flying towards a specific direction to expedite the nuking process. The wormhole got a few changes, not drastic ones. You can have 4 portals with 4 charges and not affected by anything except range and energy cost. Duration doesn't even matter. You can shoot as many bullets and amp shots through it, and it will port them to the other side. And the wormhole synergizes with antimatter drop to charge the ball halfway. The only time it consumes the portal charges if you or your teammates use the portal to travel to the other side. The biggest and drastic change came with the fourth ability. Prior to the change, you needed 2 different setups to dictate how this ability functioned. It scaled 2 ways with strength. If you modded positively for strength, it will slow down enemies, which capped at 145% strength, and if you had negative strength, it sped them up. So things like power donation and overextended to decrease your strength was the way to go for speed farming. And other teammates with growing power or another power donation, Equinox's aura, and even Zeneric's energy field could grief a speed nova because those things gave them strength that messed up their speed. Although, there was another setup called Neutrova, which had 0% speed. It didn't speed or slow enemies, but kept them as is, only used to debuff them with the prime effect. Unfortunately, you can no longer do that. Priming enemies had them take 2 times the damage to their health, so shields were not taken into account. And when you kill an enemy, you cause an explosion, which has a chain reaction effect that dealt radiation damage. Now with the changes, you no longer need to have separate builds for slow and speed. Quick Cast will generate the slowing aura that slowly expands and affects enemies who come into contact. You need 150% strength to cap out the slow at 75% movement speed and action reduction. The speed effect requires a hold cast, and the aura moves faster to affect the enemies faster. However, the speed effect has a slightly shorter duration than the slowing one. It also has 2 duration stats: how long the aura travels to reach its apex and how long the effect lasts on enemies. The debuff now affects both health and shields and deals blast damage with 20% chance to proc blast for even more chain reaction explosions. But with a recent Twitter post from Pablo himself, he decided that it was better to have both of the molecular prime expanding wave to travel at the same pace, because a lot of people didn't like it, and it kind of makes sense. So expect that change soon. Now that you know how she works, I got 4 interesting builds for you guys to try out on Nova. But first, the Archon Shards. I have 2 Tauforge casting speed shards to increase her animation speed, so all her abilities feel smoother to use. 1 red Tau for strength, so I can save a slot on the build to cap out the slow with just 1 mod. And finally, 2 purple shards for the equilibrium effect, converting health orbs into energy and energy into health, synergizing with her passive. So with that out of the way, let's have a look at the first setup, which is utilizing the second ability to nuke enemies. The objective here is to use your molecular prime with the slow aura to debuff them and of course slow them down, armor stripping, casting your ball, charge it, and send it flying to the enemies for a large explosion. And the Helminth ability I will be using is Terrify. This is an AoE armor strip that goes through walls and will synergize with the slowing and speeding effect of molecular prime. The synergy is simple: have the enemies lose their defenses to then have them take 2 times the damage for an easy nuke. So let's have a look at that build. Okay, I'm going to do a quick demonstration of the nuke build with her second ability. You want to be priming the enemies with your 4th ability, and this will of course apply the prime effect so they take 2 times the damage. Proc your 2, armor strip, detonate, and you're just going to one-shot everything. And if you're wondering how this will work against the Xmas units, well, they'll be procced with blast, so it will be a delayed explosion. Even though they have overguard, the prime will still affect them, and armor stripping them will have them take more damage. So shoot it, detonate, and then that delayed explosion for the big kabloomy. So let's have a look at the mods real quick. Okay, you may have noticed I have 115 strength. If you checked the Archon Shards section, you'll know why. Molt efficiency for the increase in our duration. This gives us 36% more duration when we have our shields active. And we're always going to be having our shields active as I'm replenishing them fairly quickly and we're nuking enemies. Arcane Energize for even more energy income because this is a spammy build. Terrify itself consumes a lot of energy per cast. That's 75 energy, while this one does cost 50 energy, so we need a lot of energy income and some efficiency for this build. For the aura, I'll be running Corrosive Projection. Now, for those wondering, why do we need Corrosive Projection if we're armor stripping with Terrify? Well, Terrify needs 168% strength, so that's Umbral Intensify and an Augur Secrets, but I only want to use 1 strength mod for this build. I'm going to stick with the Umbral Intensify, so I have 159% strength. With Corrosive Projection, this allows me to full strip with 1 cast rather than pressing it twice. And for the range increases, I'll be running Stretch, and then finally Augur Reach. Now I have 175% range, so my antimatter drop explodes within a 26.25 meter radius. And to help out with some efficiency, I'll be adding fleeting expertise at rank 4, not at rank 5, because we want to have some duration. And to counteract the negative duration from fleeting, I'll be using primed continuity, so I have 105% duration. So I'll have a base of 12 particles just to have some damage reduction, but it's not going to be our main focus for this build. And for the 2D polarities, I'll be running primed redirection for the large shield capacity, and of course that shield is going to have some damage reduction thanks to Null Star. And to replenish my shields a bit more, I do have fast deflection. This gives me that 90% shield recharge with a minus 45% shield recharge delay. And because we're going to be killing fairly quickly with a lot of 4 and 2 combo, I'll be using molecular fission. This regenerates my particles when enemies are killed under the effects of molecular prime, so I don't have to recast the ability. Otherwise, if you don't care too much about this, you can even run Vigilante Vigor for additional, or you can even go with a rank 4 Streamline for a bit more efficiency, or a primed Flow for a larger energy pool. And of course, for a larger DPS increase, prime Surefooted. If you don't have this, use Handspring or Pain Threshold. And to charge up my antimatter drop, I'll be using the Tigress. This is a simple duplex shotgun, so with one trigger, you will fully charge your antimatter drop. The build is straightforward: base damage, multi-shot, elemental damage, reload speed. More reload speed, so we have a 0.7 second. So as soon as you shoot, you're done, and all you have to do is watch the explosions. The second build is pretty simple. We're building a lot of duration and is a semi-weapon platform because you can pretty much do whatever you want. I'll be utilizing the slowing effect while stunning enemies within that slowing aura using the Helminth ability Silence. This is pretty good for any melee setup or anything that requires close quarter combat. So this stuns enemies. You see that animation is even slowed down, and I'm freezing them on top of that thanks to my companion. I'll get to the companion build near the end. And I have infinite shield recharge thanks to my Rakta Dark Dagger. On top of the shield recharge from Rakta Dark Dagger, it also armor strips them and spreads electricity. So it's a nice melee weapon platform for Nova. And I don't have to synergize with Orange Shards for this build. So let's take a look at how we put this together. Number one, let's talk about the armor stripping properties. I'll be using the Argonac, modded with the Amalgam Argonac Metal Augur. We don't care about the punch through. We only care about damage from daggers. Reduces armor by 6. This is base 6 armor, and that also counts with damage over time and spread effects, and that's easily done with melee influence since it's an AoE damage over time. And the Rakta Dark Dagger has a special passive, as you can see on the top right corner. Hits to irradiated targets, restores shields, and creates overshields. Unfortunately, this does not work when your shields are broken, and only when you're regenerating shields or when you have shields. And the build is pretty straightforward. You have your stance over here, Discipline's Merit, to trigger Tennokai after 4 hits, so some nice heavy attacks, and that will bleed some enemies. And the way we're getting electricity is thanks to, of course, Shocking Touch and spreading that electricity with melee influence. So I'm spreading electric and viral. You could switch this out to gas and electric if you want. That's even faster armor strip. Having viral is a nice debuff as well. Now, moving on to that Nova build itself. Now, here is an empty slot. This empty slot can be whatever you want. You could run Combat Discipline and Arcane Avenger, or you could run Empowered Blades, so when you heavy attack, you deal even more status damage, and you're going to be easily hitting those heavy attacks thanks to Tennokai. And since you're regenerating shields fairly easily, this is a pretty good mod. If you don't care too much about this, you can even go with Swift Momentum to add even more combo duration. And for the Excellus, definitely PSF, because spending less time on your butt is a huge DPS increase. And because this is a heavy duration build, I'm going to be running Primed Continuity and Narrow-Minded. This gives me 254% duration, so that's 30 particles. Now we'll be running some strength as well, so Umbral Intensify, which gives me 7% damage reduction per particle. So we're pretty tanky. With the D polarities, I'll be going Primed Redirection and Shield Recharge mods, so Vigilante Vigor and Fast Deflection. We're going to be heavy attacking attacking with empowered blades thanks to Tennokai. That allows us to deal even more damage, and on top of that, I'm replenishing my shields fairly quickly. Another reminder, Rock to Dark Dagger does not replenish your shields if they're fully broken. So I'll be synergizing with the shield recharge rate and Guardian from my Sentinel, which I'll get to a bit later. And because we want our silence to hit enemies within a decent radius, I will be bringing up that range to 15.8 meters. And all I need to do is add a stretch, which is nice to target a lot of enemies and to even stun that pesky violence. Now, the last mod can be whatever you want. You can add even more duration with Constitution or Augur Message, or you can add even more shield recharge, with Fortitude. You don't need energy as much because you won't be casting abilities as much. And if you don't want to be recasting your Null Star, you're easily left with Molecular Fission. So this slot, again, this Arcane slot is down to you and how you want to play. So this is where we leave it up to you and you can decide for yourself. Now, the third build is utilizing Null Star to nuke enemies with its Neutron Star augments. Neutron Star allows your Null Star to deal heat damage and proc heat on enemies. This, of course, is enhanced with Archon Vitality, so it deals double the heat damage. And for the Helminth ability, I'll be using Nourish. Nourish allows my Null Star to proc Viral alongside the heat, and of course, they also deal blast damage. So having 3 status effects on enemies and synergizing with the fourth ability while also resetting the cooldown on my Sentinel's abilities. So when we cast our Neutron Star, you see it's proccing Viral and that heat. And this is without Molecular Prime, so you see we're not doing as much damage. So you want to make sure you prime your enemies so you get even more explosions. So prime enemies, they got that 2 times debuff. And boom, explode them. And to increase my damage even more, I'll be using Vigorous Swap. See, that was a lot faster. So let's take a look at how we put this build together. For the Arcanes, I'll be running Molt Augmented to give me that 60% strength at 250 kills. Molt Efficiency grants me 36% duration, so that increases my antimatter particles, because having duration and particles will of course increase our damage even more. For the Aura, I'll be running Corrosive Projection for that minus 18% armor. Prime Sure-Footed, you know how it is. And for range, I'll be running Stretch and Augur Reach. Simple as that. Both of these give me 175% range, which allows my particles to reach a 17.5 meters. And for the only duration mod, I'll be running Primed Continuity. So Primed Continuity and Molt Efficiency will give me a total of 18 particles. So to increase the damage of my first ability even further, I'll be running Blind Rage and Umbral Intensify. With the Archon Shard, I'll be getting 258% strength. This is the modded value with 60% more from the conditional value. Now we want the Neutron Star Augment, which converts the damage to heat. And to add on to that heat, I'll be running Archon Vitality. You don't even need to rank this up. You just need this here for the secondary effect. Status effects from abilities that deal heat damage will be applied twice. So our Null Star will deal 2 times the damage. And then finally, to increase the damage even further, I'll be running Vigorous Swap. Vigorous Swap is a base damage increase for your weapons. However, this also affects Null Star. So spamming your weapon swap or melee to then go to your guns will trigger Vigorous Swap. And the icon is indicated on the top right corner. Right there, Vigorous Swap. You can spam the weapon swap as you cast your first ability, and will have a permanent uptime. I find this a lot better to use than using Arcane Arachne, because you would have to find a wall and wall latch. So you have to keep that in mind every 30 seconds, while Vigor Swap is always active by just swapping your weapons. And your weapons do not matter unless you're killing an Acolyte. So take any weapon that's pretty good at killing Acolytes. That's about it. And finally, the last build is a speed build. This build allows you to break the enemy AI. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on Overguard, but it works on pretty much anything else. It's really good for crowd controlling and pretty nice in defense missions if you want to speed up enemies while also moving their attention away from the pod. This build uses the Resonator Helminth ability, which is from Octavia. This pacifies enemies, drawing their aggro away from anything else and towards the ball. The main thing for this build is that we want speed, so that's the hold cast on Molecular Prime, and using this ball, driving enemies crazy so you can just finish them off pretty easily. The best thing is, this is a build for Nova that just sits back and you can even let your teammates do most of the work. And it's actually not bad in Netracell farming. So let's have a look at how we put this build together. Alright, for the Arcanes, I'll be running Molt Augmented and Arcane Energize. The best part is, this is a speed build and I'm going to be running Strength, while also losing some Strength. I'll show you. In the aura, I'll be running Growing Power. So when I proc a status effect, from my weapons, I will get 25% bonus strength. And of course, we already know what's happening in the Exilus mod. For duration, I'll be running Primed Continuity alongside Augur Message and Constitution. So this gives me a total of 207% duration. So both my Resonator and my Molecular Prime last long. And at the same time, I'm keeping my Wormhole because I use this to travel across the map, as we don't care too much about the first ability. For range, I'll be running Overextended, Stretch, and Augur Reach. This will give me a total of 265% range. I do lose some strength, it goes down to 40, but with a bonus 15%, we go up to 55. Growing Power adds onto that strength, Molt Augmented also adds onto that strength. For some energy, I'm going with Primed Flow, and for some additional survivability, I can go with Primed Redirection or even Rolling Guard. Since we're going to be getting a lot of status effects procs from, let's say, doing Netracells, Rolling Guard is a good mod to have here, giving us that 3 seconds of invulnerability and cleansing us of status effects. And this is pretty much the crowd control AI breaking build. As I said, the weapons can be whatever you want. Now that you have an idea of how I'm modding my Nova with the 4 builds, let's take a look at our companion, because this plays a huge role in most of the builds, as it prevents us from getting status effect procced and it crowd controls enemies for us. And that is the Worm Prime, currently the best Sentinel in the entire game. And this is the Funnies build. We got Guardian to regenerate my shields whenever they fully break. Negate to prevent status effects, which is now affected by Manifold Bond, which is pretty damn huge. Assault mode, so it can shoot the enemies with its Sentinel weapon. Shield Charger gives me additional shield recharge and increases my shield value, so always good to have. But take a look here. Mystic Bond. When my companion uses 5 abilities, I can cast an ability with 0 energy cost, which is pretty damn huge. And it's easily going to be going through these abilities right here. And thanks to Manifold Bond and all the status effects procs, it's going to be refreshing these fairly quickly. But for a fully weapon platform build, you don't have to worry about these extra things. So this is how it would go with a regular build. I'll be running Reinforced Bond and Tenacious Bond to give me the crit damage and fire rate on my weapons. But this is the build I'm using for my Novas. And the weapon in question is the Artax. The Artax comes from Taxon, so it's a Sentinel weapon you can get early on. And the build is pretty simple. Multi-shot, fire rate, with even more fire rate. It has corrosive and radiation, but it's innate cold. But if I pair that innate cold with shivering contagion, I'm able to cold proc in a bigger area. And because it has a lot of fire rate and it's a beam weapon, it's easily targeting a lot of enemies. For the focus school, on all the builds, I'll be running Zenoric. Zenoric is very good to synergize with Nova and her new passive, and pretty much any build that requires a lot of energy. With its Wellspring, you get that energy regen over time. Hardened Wellspring gives you 20% additional strength when you cast the ability a second time to expand that Wellspring field. And with Inner Might, I get a free cast every 60 seconds. So that's pretty damn good. Another big thing for energy management is Energy Pulse. So I gain 50% more energy and additional energy over time for 5 seconds. Alright folks, that has been it from all the builds and the Nova rework that I'll be showcasing here today. If you've enjoyed and learned something from this video, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more Warframe content, streams, and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, a peace. Bye-bye now.